Hello, remote people. We're going to start a little bit late. We're still missing a few people, so just please be patient. Thanks. Okay, let's have a seat and get started again. Thank you. To mirror that.
Nursery, where did you go? Type that shit in your generator right now. They don't have one generator. You guys got this. Don't let me down.
So, anything to, hello? Hi. Hey, Warren. Hey, Mike. Hey, Warren. Hey.
Oh, yeah.
Does anybody have any insights or progress they'd like to report after your lunchtime discussions? Oh, microphones. Deploy the microphones.
Yes, that I think we need to unpack.
Fine. Yeah, that's not.
So we have Aaron and then Chris is on the queue.
Yeah, so a few of us spent lunch working on a kind of hybrid proposal that would combine elements of the Madhavan display-focused draft with the Simon me non-linked use draft. And I am not yet on the correct thing to present. Apologies. So I gotta work on that. Give me 1 second. Perhaps someone else who was in that discussion would like to talk about it while I work on that.
Okay, so the idea is to create an AI output category that deals with scenarios where an AI model is fetching content and using that to inform a response or to a user query. So if you said no to that categorically, that would mean in any case where an AI model produces a response to an end user, your content cannot be used to inform that response, which is of course very broad and would exclude you from a lot of things, probably including search, which is why we propose to actually include a list of parameters in this category that say, so if you say AI output, yes, you may use this content for AI outputs, you can set certain conditions. For example, you can set the condition your AI output has to include a link back to the content used, which would exclude, for example, an AI summary that doesn't link back at all. But of course, there are also scenarios where publishers, for example, want to not just exclude AI summaries that don't link back at all, but also certain AI summaries that do link back. And so for that, we would have an additional parameter called something like quote, which would say, not if you use this content in the AI output, you have to represent that content as an exact quote that is specified by the person setting the preference. And you can combine these two requirements, the link requirement and the quote requirement. So if you set both of them, it says the output has to consist of only the text you specified as the quote and the link. So in other words, traditional search where you just show the snippet and the link back. So this would replace the search category, but would also allow for people to set preferences about AI summaries in a kind of granular manner where you can say no AI summaries at all, or only AI summaries that include a link.
Before we continue, we need to select a scribe or scraps for the afternoon. Any volunteers? Now no one wants to speak. We can randomly select someone. Anyone? Orange, you look very guilty.
Last time I took notes and nobody was happy with my notes.
I'm not sure I want to reward that behavior.
Okay, I will do it.
You will. People can help far up here.
Yeah, because I'm not a great note taker, you know.
Other folks, please get on to the minutes and sort of make those the best notes ever. There.
But tomorrow, we'll have the guy doing it, okay?
Sorry. Yeah.
Tomorrow, the man will be the note taker, please.
Why is that better?
Because note taking is a traditionally gendered activity that women are disproportionately asked to do.
Agreed.
Fair enough.
Amen. Okay.
Took advantage of having a mic for that one.
So playing backwards, have we been unintentionally biased so far? I forget to say.
Note taking is a hard task that
It is.
I don't want.
If you don't want to do it, that's fine.
No, I wouldn't want to do it. It's actually good. No, but I will do it if I want. It's okay.
Okay, so I am presenting the kind of working draft that we put together over lunch. This is very, very rough. It should be, seen as a starting point, not an ending point. But as Felix was saying, it is sort of recasting the search category to be more in line with the display preferences, and turning that into a focus on outputs, so that it is more technology neutral and not trying to define what a search engine is or limit the application to just search engines, while also addressing what we think are common desires among content providers, so that there is a way to require a link but allow summarization or quotation with a link. There is a way to require direct quotation, so this would implicitly disallow summarization or other generation of text. And the combination of the two would mean that the content can only be used to provide a link with a verbatim quote. And we were also talking about incorporating some of the max text length, max image size parameters, but that's sort of a next level of complicated, so we wanted to save that until we fleshed out the basic structure. And there are definitely still a few open questions, and I might try to go in and actually write them down to help us focus on them. But I think one of the things that we were really discussing is whether folks would want a set of search results that consists only of a linked list, a list of links, potentially with titles and snippets, but sort of what people think of as traditional simple search, if that should be in or out of this AI output category. And I think that question is, do people want to be able to object to the entirety of processing of their content in connection with AI and be out of that traditional search function, or be able to, if they said yes to this category and then put the constraints on it, they would kind of collapse it back down to that.
Say that again.
Sorry, that was not clear, even in my head. We were debating whether what I'm going to call blue link results should be included in this category or not. And the reason to not include it is just if you think most people will not want to control that or have other ways to control that, then including that in this category makes the category overbroad and requires people to say yes to this category and then put parameters to limit it back down. But if we are going to create this category in an attachment mechanism dissimilar to robots.txt, where people might want to disallow all AI processing, including traditional search, then your mileage might vary.
So just make sure I understand. If I do link plus quote,
Need to move the mic.
sorry, yes. if I do link plus quote, that's like approximately current blue link thing, right?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay,
that is the intention.
okay. Right, yeah.
Okay. We have a few, can we keep the discussion to immediate responses to this just for the time being, and then we'll move on to other topics? Chris, was this about this or, okay, what, to your previous question? Okay. Michael?
I don't want to be the downer here, but I'm strongly concerned with focusing with the output. It is interesting you actually use the word input as you were drafting this.
Yeah.
As a content creator, I think it'll be very difficult for me to trace how my content is being used and transformed in the output. Whilst I think the problem is at the source. As a content creator, I simply don't want it to be used or retained in models through time as they generate content downstream. This is a little worrying for me, but I don't know if it's shared with the content creators in the room. I'm going to stop here, but we did put also a proposal forward, which is actually the inverse of this, which is focusing on the AI input as a term to be used as part of the the output feels to me like too far down the street.
Can I just clarify? So this is also, if you read closely, it is about using as input with the aim of generating. And it is not in the, it's clearly a category which exists on the deployed model side. It's not the training thing. It's not about, if you are concerned about the concerns that you expressed about something being maintained in the model and having effects on output from that model. This control is not for that. For that, the existing AI training or generative AI training controls are the ones you need to use. So that if you are concerned about...
If the training category would encompass the newer evolutions of RAG type sort of models, then yes. But if training is explicitly avoiding those, then my concern would be my answer to that. Because in fact, we have training as a separate category from AI input to cover that use case.
We also have a training separate from AI. Like, this is not a replacement for the training or for the generative AI training category. This is a attempt to present an additional category that operates when input is, like, the assets are provided as input to trained AI models. If you want to influence the sort of like training stage, if you want to say it's okay to include the asset in the training process, the other component.
So if I don't want my content to be used as part of, say, RAG, I would say AI output, no.
Yes.
And the AI model will never fit my content in the first place.
No.
That's what I'm trying to avoid.
Yeah, it's a response to query.
But I want to avoid it from being fetched and ingested. That's my point.
Okay. It's always full.
Right.
What do you mean by ingested? By fetched? I understand what
But as input to any process in the model does on my content. If there's a way to express that in the proposal, then fine.
That was not what the work of this group is.
Can I have read on that?
Sorry.
Clarify.
The work of this group does not govern whether or not content can be obtained. That's what robots.txt does. The content of this work is about expressing preferences with respect to what happens after that point. So it may influence that decision on the part of a crawler, not knowing that they cannot use something for the purpose that they intend to use it for. They may then decide not to get it as a result, but it's not a governing control in that sense. It comes down to their understanding of the preferences, their understanding of the application that's as it relates to those preferences, and then making the decision simply not to get the content because they know that they can't use it at that point. But that's not what we're trying to do here. Now, I understand that may not be satisfactory for you, but that's how it is.
Yeah, maybe to
Sorry, folks, we do have a queue. So, Leonard's up next.
Yeah, so I will say that assuming the inclusion of the section in purple suggested by Felix, I think this is a nice addition to the categories that we have been discussing. And I obviously, as discussed, consider it an addition, and I think it's a nice addition to input and training and the other things that we've been discussing. But I would very much want to see that inclusion by Felix, because I think it goes to what we were discussing earlier and Bradley's proposal. Thank you.
Ecker.
Yeah, it seems like some useful progress. I have a question and then maybe two questions. I'm having trouble understanding the interaction between, or rather the function of the text after following user queries in the first sentence. Namely, that is that if you were to remove everything after user queries, would it have any impact? Because I guess, because I understand it, the basic thing is you're using things input to produce a thing, and you're saying that's authorized or unauthorized, and then you're saying also when you do a link or whatever. I want to add one more thing about the way this is interpreted. It's probably fine, but like this is in the yes state. This is a coherent. This makes a lot of sense. In the no state, like saying, I'm not sure how much sense it's going to make to say you can use it if you don't provide a link. You can't use it if you do provide a link. Maybe that makes sense, but maybe it doesn't. So I don't want to flag that point. But I'm sure we can find some way to make that work if we felt this is otherwise fine. I think I would definitely want people to focus on whether this is the right direction, not whether this text is exactly correct. The second thing I wanted to ask is, as I said in the last session, I think we had go back and forth about this, Felix. One thing that happens is models are now set up so they try not to reproduce the content directly, right? But imagine you build a model which was designed to reproduce, memorize, and reproduce more than things currently do, and you use that to service queries exactly as you do now, right? And so, like, the vast majority of the stuff in the model is being serviced is not being ragged. It's already in like the search engine, right? And so, if instead of like, if instead of taking the like ragging it right then and there, I like respond to the search queries by like pulling things out of my memory and shoving them in here. I think this would have nothing to say about that. And I guess I'm not. And I think that with the addition of the link and the quote, I think we have a orthogonality problem. Which what I mean to say is this: like that. It seems to me I don't want to say it is fine to use this content to generate these summaries, no matter how technically you do it, provided you provide a link in his exact quote or whatever, right? And so that would be so I think I'm just wondering, do we really need this text of as input to a training model as opposed to training the model? Because isn't the thing I care about, no matter how you do it, whether you like provide a link or a quote?
Yeah, so we did consider that, and the reason why input to a trained model is there is to distinguish from the case where the model is being trained, because we don't want this to extend backward in time, where we think it could be ambiguous if it doesn't have that statement that the use of the model, that the asset would be used in the generation of outputs if it is used to train a model that eventually does generate outputs.
Right. So I think that's a totally sensible piece of wordsmithing. Let me just try to up-level a little bit, which is, do we think it should be possible to say, it is fine to train on this text, and it's fine to produce, like the thing it says here, as a generation of user queries, but only if you use links. And because right now you can't say that. Right now with the current text, all you can say is you can train or you can't train. You can't say it's fine to train and use it to produce like snippets, but you got to give links, right? So people think you should be able to say that. And if you do, then we need to find somebody to do it. And I don't care if we do it now, we should write it down. And if people don't think we should do that, then why not?
I'm going to take my prerogative as the screen share to say I don't think we want to do that. I think training is too far upstream of application, and that would kind of affect training of foundational models, which are used for different purposes, and like models might be adapted over time to different uses. And I just think that introduces a lot of complexity that we can safely avoid, because people who object to training generative models probably object to training any model.
Can we mark this down as something to think about if we adopt this proposal? So I don't think I have a lot more time, so I'm worried about innovation in particular.
Ecker, can you have on the GDoc, just as on that thing?
Great.
All right.
Thanks, Felix.
Yeah, I want to get back to the point that I think Michael raised about like why are we focusing on the output versus the ingestion, and I think I want to add to what I think Martin has said, that for the ingestion part you kind of have robots.txt, but I think there's also a reason here, because we do want this category to allow people to express that they want to be included in search. And if you're saying, I don't want RAG to touch my content at all, like not even to analyze it, then you are sort of implying that it will not be included in search. Because if you, like for example, if a search engine is trying to figure out whether a particular content is relevant to the search query, it has to touch it with AI. So if you already rule out just looking at it at the ingestion stage, then you already imply that it will not be included in search. But there is a lot of demand from people who say, I don't want my press article to be summarized by an AI summary, but I do want it to show up in the search results. And if you want that, then you do have to allow the AI to ingest the content, but you have to restrict how it is output. And that's why we are suggesting to do it this way.
Okay, Elliot.
All right, let's try this again. Can you hear me all right?
Ish.
Okay, well, we'll settle for ish. So I sort of like what you wrote, Aaron, and friends. You know, I'm new to this, so I'm just more of an observer, but I'll note that link and quote, well, link really is a form of attribution. There are other forms of attribution which may also be appetizing to content creators. A good example might be, let me add a snippet if you're going to use this to say, hey, here's a caution, or here's where you go for more information, and maybe have something along those lines as an example of alternatives. And what I like about this, by the way, is in a permissions model, you know, sometimes we always think of permit and deny, but really this is more, you know, policy, condition, and action. And I like the, you know, the breadth of it. Thanks.
Thanks, Elliot. George.
Yeah, thanks. So, Michael, like you did bring up some concern, right? Like, and I did see like you and Leah published a draft on this. So, is it possible at some point during the day, like you kind of walk through it and say like what this doesn't cover? Because like if you look at it, right, this proposal is like kind of addition to like what we want to do in the vocabulary. So, like if there's some purpose that you want, it's not being met by this. It would be good if you can kind of walk us through it and see how you can incorporate into this if possible.
Yeah, good. Krishna. Microphone for Krishna.
So I just want to add that one of the strengths of the display-based preference was the fact that it was output focused. And what we've tried to do here is to incorporate the best components of that along with the other ideas that have been coming up from Erin and from others. And it does address many of the scenarios, for example, code generation scenarios and others that were problematic yesterday. There are some real disadvantages to actually thinking about restricting input to a system that's processing a whole bunch of things. For example, a generation that is used commonly in various applications is a relevance code, which is also an output, but it's a different form of output that we may not think about normally when we think about AI output. Or a spam marking might be one of those. Or a safety marking may be another one of those. So when you say AI input equals no, and it actually restricts you from doing all of that, the assumption is the model will always generate some output. You don't just input into a model for nothing. So there's some real limitations to thinking about it in the form of output. We talked a little bit about it, and we incorporated language here that potentially gets around and sidesteps some of the limitations that would keep people out of normal, well-understood scenarios.
Elaine.
Thanks. A couple of questions. One, was it the intention to cover grounding in this when this was being worked on at lunchtime? I can pause or ask my second question.
I would say yes.
Yes. Okay. I want to come back on that later with thoughts on separating out search and grounding possibly. But my second question is, Eric pointed out that in the first sentence, the phrase user queries is there and asked about it. I have the same question. I don't think it was answered, especially with the phrase not provided by the user in there, which is probably a good thing to have in there. What does user queries mean in the first sentence?
So there is a definition of user query. And that definition is a tiny bit circular, but it is input submitted by the end user. So, getting at the notion that there is a human being making a request somewhere. And also says that it is content type neutral. So the request can be in a form that is not necessarily a typed out question. And that it can include assets. So if the user is supplying content to the model, that would be outside of the scope of this permission or preference.
So I'm confused. So are we also including agentic AI applications in here, or was the last thing you said a carve out?
Yeah, I think that would mean that agentic applications are in scope in terms of what they use, like go out and fetch and return back to the end user, but that whatever the end user is supplying in the request would not be in scope. And maybe we don't want this to cover agentic at all, and we need to think about how to carve that out. And so I welcome your suggestions.
Yeah, overloaded, I think, in a few ways here.
Sure, whatever. Okay, Sonia.
I think what we're intending to cover here, and potentially what we have covered here, is I think it might be quite broad at the moment. Generation of outputs is generally broad. I don't know if you can scroll back down. I'm just looking at the text, but it will, all outputs, or rather all AI models will generate some form of output, even if it's not something consumable to a user. I think there might be a generation of outputs that doesn't use the content in the output, but it's still being used to generate the output. And I think that's not excluded in this definition. I think here we're also talking about a particular type of asset, and that's web crawled assets. So I think it makes sense to narrow to this scenario that we're considering at the moment.
Yeah, I think we can definitely add, I was going to type in the open question of should this be limited to web crawl, but I don't understand the case where the content would be used, but then not sit in the output, and this would not apply because it says the use of an asset as an input in the generation of outputs, and that you can limit that to the case where the output includes a direct quote, or that the asset the use of the asset is limited to quoting from the asset.
So say, for example, in response to a user query that could be kind of a search for images or something, and the AI processes the various images, finds that something contains harmful images, takes that into account when generating an output that doesn't include any of that image. That might be one scenario I can think of off the top of my head, but there are probably others. And it strays into kind of that broader inferencing category in my mind that we were trying to limit.
Well, yeah, so we deliberately didn't get into differences in content types here because that's kind of the next level of granularity to specify, and we wanted to keep this higher level. But I think if, in your example, if the image used is not displayed to the end user, then that would be prohibited by the quote parameter. And if you don't think that's the case, I would really like to understand why.
So I guess what we're, and maybe I'm misreading this, so I would see the kind of first section of this being the kind of top level control, and then the conditions that are stated below ones that a user, or rather a publisher, could potentially additionally apply. Is that right? So that first section of the definition, before it goes into the following conditions may optionally be included as parameters, that's essentially the control that we'll be providing. Is that right?
Well, I think the top level thing is a statement of preference, generally.
Yeah.
Yes or no to being used as an input. And then you can condition that on some requirements. So the way that these interact is if, let's say somebody says AI output, yes, condition equals quote, then that would mean that you can only do the AI output category when the asset is used as a direct verbatim quotation or display.
So let me explain kind of the scenario that I mentioned previously that I don't think we'd want to cover. I publish, let's say I'm publishing like harmful images. I don't want to, as kind of third party, give the ability to necessarily prevent the use of AI to detect that that's a harmful image. Mm-hmm. And I think at the moment this does.
Okay, that's a really helpful motivating example, because we did talk about that, and the intention here is that by focusing on what is displayed to an end user, that we exempt the category of processing that is the internal scoring and abuse detection and yeah.
Yeah, and good to know that that's the intention. I think maybe if we tie the outputs more specifically to the input rather than any output, because you always get an output from an AI, then that probably helps.
Well, right, and that's why we defined output here. So it's not just that the AI process returns a result. It is that something is then displayed to the end user, and I think we need to get more crisp about what that is and how it has to be something more substantial than just like a decision not to show the image or to label it as harmful. Or I totally see where you're going, and please do edit in that direction because it's difficult to express, I think.
Yeah, great, thank you.
Mike. No,
So, thank you, Felix, Krishna, for clarifying. Of course, AI output, of course, needs to live in the broader context. I just had one little thing to say. I don't think robots.txt fully solves the concern I was putting forward, and I'm not too worried about search being impacted by a AI input type framing of this, as you could still carve out search with its own term, which has been proposed many times in this group.
Okay, Alyssa.
I think actually my question sort of came out in the discussion with Sonia, so I'm good. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Felix.
I wanted to react to the agent question that came up. So we discussed that the definition of outputs could specify that, I've highlighted the relevant section in the output definition, that if just because you're handing off an output to an agent first, that wouldn't mean that this category would no longer apply, provided that the end result of the multi-step process that may involve agent is still an output that is delivered to an end user. So if that is the case, then sort of agentic use cases would be included. But if the end result is not an output delivered to a user, then this category would not affect it.
Okay, Becker? Fortunately, I joined the queue to address that point. I guess the version of this I have in my head is there's an API. I hit that API and, sorry, I thought I was. The version of this I have in my head is that I hit some API and I make essentially the same query that I would have made typing on this into my browser, but I hit it with a piece of software. And I don't understand how you have any idea what the endpoint of that is going to be, whether that's going to be shown to the user or not. So like, so I think, I mean, like, I'm not trying to take a position right now whether it should include or should not include machine use cases. I think you work the arguments either way, but I think it absolutely needs to be very clear which one of them it is. And so I think we have to like eventually come down at that point one way or the other.
Mark. Yeah. So, told myself. So I think the original intent here was to try to address this question of what was being presented to a person, but your point about an API is that a person? Well, potentially it is a person immediately thereafter, or potentially it's fed into another system, and you don't really know at that point because it's just an output of the system. And I think this is where the definitional part of this gets really, really interesting. I got in line to sort of say that one of the things that was this was trying to attempt to do was establish the substitutive aspects of this, and only try to address those sorts of things. And so by saying when it's presented to a person or presented as the output of a complex system, then it is operative, and otherwise it isn't. Was supposed to be a useful way of doing that. I realize that boundary doesn't exist in a lot of cases because you interconnect systems, and so you'll notice here that there was parenthetical text. It's not in here at the moment. Directly at the end of a multi-step process was one of the things that we debated a little bit here, and we didn't really get to the bottom of. And I think that's one of the things that needs to be addressed here. If you imagine you've got a chain of processes that take assets in at various points and make decisions, and then feed the output of that into another system that on and on and on and on and on. If the expectation is that the information is then presented to someone or presented as the output of a complex system, then this would operate in that circumstance. And so the agentic question is an interesting one that's been asked here. And if you imagine an agent, it's producing multiple types of outputs. Sometimes the agent will say, please show this on the screen, because this is text that's in a dialogue, or it's a prompt to ask someone for something. And in that case, it would qualify for this. Whereas if the agent says, please navigate to this particular web page and tell me what's shown there, then that would not be under this rule. And I think the intent of that was to sort of get more to the substitutive use and reproduction of original assets and that sort of question. But it may be that this is not satisfactory to some people. But I think the question that we need to ask is it useful for some number of people to be able to express preference about this sort of thing? And of course, the usual question, which is, can it be operationalized in a way that makes sense in the systems that use these things?
Better?
Yeah, I mean, introducing the agentic problem, as has been said, I just think overly complicates this. I understand why we can and should consider it, but because it's not just about, as Martin said, certainly there's the output, but it's also the input. The definition here of user query is by an end user, but queries need not be created by end users. The agent itself could be defining the query. I also pointed out in chat that we could be looking at, and in fact, many systems today are multi-agent. And the agent could be so far down in the multi-agent step process, it has no idea where things came from or necessarily where its output is going to be going. And so I worry that, and this was also pointed out by someone else, I forget who, I apologize, in chat, that at a certain point, we're starting to step over into things like WebBot auth. We're not necessarily the auth, but as much as those preferences. How do our preferences relate to a form of, and again, I hate to use the word authorization, but preferences that need to be understood by those agents. And so I would tend to favor that we not worry about that particular set of use cases for our initial deliverables and continue to focus on what we have been, which is end user input and end user output. Thank you.
Yeah, so I guess I said earlier that I was just advocating for being clear, but now I think I'll advocate for something specific, which is, it seems to me that what you want is that this is what you present at the system boundary. The system boundary is the web interface or the API interface. This is what you present at the system boundary. And so you may have an arbitrary number of agents that you control to do whatever garbage they do, and that's like the end of a long chain. But at the end of the day, it spits out from your system boundary to someone else's system boundary, and this is what you got to admit, that system boundary. And that guy may have that guy may have like his own agents and his own automation. That's none of your business.
Can you keep looking for your?
Sure. That guy may have his own automation, his own agents, but it's none of your business, right? And he may never display it to a user, but again, none of your business. Your business is like the system boundary. This is what you present. So I think if you just like remove the word query, user from query, we probably basically there. And that would, and then the
System boundary input, system boundary output.
be great. Yes.
Can you repeat that?
Martin said system boundary input, system boundary output. And that would be a clumsy but fine way to phrase this. I think that covers the right intuition that like your responsibility is to do these things and consume and emit these things. Otherwise, I'm not quite sure how to phrase this.
David. Microphone.
First, thanks to the group for putting together. It clearly has resulted in conversation, which is super helpful. And I say that as a preface to apologize for asking a question as I try to understand it. On the same sort of topic of boundaries, if someone were to say AI output no, it is relatively clear to me that it would not result in an AI summary. It is relatively clear to me that it would not result in a chatbot response. What I'm not sure I understand is whether they would appear in search today if they said AI output no.
So we discussed that, and as the category is currently drafted, they would probably not show up in search because the search result is an AI output. We briefly discussed whether it would be possible to narrow down the definition of output in a way that would exclude the linked list scenario. But the way that it's drafted now, if you say AI output no, you would be out of search, which is why we propose to include these parameters that would allow you to say AI output yes under certain conditions if you want to be in search.
That's super helpful. I think probably not yet sufficiently clear, because if I was a site owner, I don't think that would match my expectation for what the behavior is here. And I think we understand that lots of folks want to disambiguate those two things. If we think that's impossible, we should articulate a clear statement of why. Otherwise, I think it's going to result in both mismatched expectations on the user side, but also differential implementation by crawler, which is not necessarily efficient or helpful.
Yeah, so the intent was always to clarify that. It's just that we hadn't answered the question yet. And so once we answer the question, we can clarify it.
Super helpful.
Good feedback.
That would make a great poll.
The question of whether if someone says no to this category, that means that you're in search or not, or that you would appear in search potentially.
Says no to
So the-
AI output.
So the whole point of this is that the search engine can know about the content, it can infer about the content, it can rank the content, it can do all sorts of things internally with the content, but at the point that it comes to spitting out a search results page or something at the system boundary, it would be prohibited from generating any content that used the thing that was referenced. And I understand the technical challenges that are implicit in that, but that was the intent of all of this. And so we have that decision to make. I think the obvious thing to do with the sort of natural definition that we have right now is that simply you cannot emit anything about that content at that boundary, but we could decide that something much more narrow about that content could be admitted regardless.
Okay, can you get to later, please?
Thank you, Daniel. You basically read my mind. So I had the same confusion, and while trying to listen to everyone talk, I tried to essentially write out the categories and subcategories that we keep coming back to. And one kind of, I have, I guess, a two-part question. One is, I understand that I think it was in July in London, there was some discussion of subcategories, and I'm not sure if those ultimately got removed or what the history is there. So maybe if there are folks who are familiar with that history, that'd be helpful to hear. But it seems to me like when we're talking about search, and now that I've learned more about like the use of AI and even the indexing and ranking section, it sounds like the search category could benefit from subcategories, one of which is only indexing and ranking is allowed. Another one is like an AI overview summary type thing. And then another one is snippets kind of to the point of the display preferences that have been discussed, where it's like an exact match or only a certain amount of words, etc. And I wonder if that's what other people think, if it's worth kind of tying together all these different proposals to break out search into multiple subcategories, then have AI training as a category that has its definitions, and then have like real-time use category and its sub-definitions to get a little bit more granular.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm circling on the same thing that we sort of been, how others have asked. Like, I would have read this text as allowing me to say, even if you said no, here's a link you might be interested in. Like I could like just the whole thing, I can do as much AI as I want, and I can include this as a link you'd be interested in, and I could provide that link, and in fact I probably could provide whatever anchor was associated with links that wasn't AI generated, right? So I would read this a lot. Now, if that's a useful product, a different question, though that's what Google was back in the day. But like I would read me as being allowed to do that. So I don't so much care about that precise product, but I do want to make sure that again, this text is got to be clear on whether I'm allowed to do AI processing as long as there's no part of generating the output. And if the answer is, and that's the intent, then this probably could be sharper. So if that's the intent, everybody's on their head, I'm going to make a comment here.
Yeah. Okay. Alyssa.
So again, I apologize because I wasn't here in the morning, but I'm just up leveling a little bit, curious what people view as the advantages of this approach over the approach in Krishna's draft. Like I'm a little lost on why this seems better than that.
Anyone?
I have many things. I think we see it as a sort of merging of different approaches. Like one sort of addresses like I think we were all in agreement that the description of calling this output is more instructive than the display. Krishna's approach is very mediums or text specific. Most of the examples where we use very specific modalities for each of that makes it a little bit complicated. So we try to reduce the express reliance on specific modalities to bring it in a single category. Like, I think it is just an attempt to essentially condense Krishna's draft into a category that fits more easily in the system that we already have in the overall structure. I don't know if
Okay,
Okay.
that's helpful. Thank you.
I'm wondering, Krishna, do you have any thoughts? Yeah, we have no cue right now. Krishna, since it's being related to Europe, do you have any thoughts?
So there is a lot of discussion on the output part being somehow exposed to the user as part of many of the discussions that we are having. The question that I think that the display preferences perhaps still needs to address if we continue on with the draft is the code generation aspect and things like that that we did not address as part of the display. That being said, I think the feedback that I'm hearing a lot, and it's been circulated a lot, is around whether this is search-centric or not. And we've tried to push back on the idea and said, hey, this is not search-centric, and it covers a lot of different scenarios. There's still much work to be done on this draft, for example, to define what exactly an output is and things like that. But it's so far as it's an effort to bring the drafts together, it's a start. There's still much work that we need to do to iron things out. One aspect that also something for us to consider is that display preferences explicitly says, hey, web and AI crawlers are the collection mechanism. There is some limits that we have to place around that, but these are all discussions that we need to have. But I think at some point there needs to be reconciliation of proposals. So this is a start in my mind to that process.
I'm wondering if it would be useful to take a couple of polls, not to make a choice, but just to get a sense of where people's attention is more than anything. Something in the form of one asking if you think that Krishna's draft is a promising direction forward, and one asking if Aaron's proposal is a promising direction forward, with the understanding you can say yes to both those questions.
Group proposal.
Sorry?
Group proposal.
Group proposal. Let's say display preferences and AI outputs. So let's not associate with names. Yes, that's not. Thank you. So I'll just put those in. So you can say yes to both.
Sorry, but I asked that question because, and Paul's answer sort of indicates that this one is actually like an attempt to integrate the concepts of the other one. So I'm not really sure why you would set them up as like alternatives.
I was trying to very much not set them up as alternatives.
Okay.
If you like both, vote for both. I'm just seeing it where the room is sitting.
Obviously,
Like, Krishna was also part of the group of Aaron's proposal.
Okay, I did not have that information. Okay, yeah.
So this is like, so Aaron also, like, we started with a Aaron draft, like that she circulated on mailing list before, and we started with Krishna's draft when we sat down. And if you scroll down in the document, I think both of them are there. This is really like a genuine attempt to reconcile the two. So putting them in opposition is weird.
Okay.
But I am.
Maybe instead the question could be, is this a viable, like, is it worth exploring this further or something like this?
I think honestly, the only alternative approach that I heard to that in that team, I think was I don't know, it was back there, having an explicit search, like, does this remove the need for an explicit search preference? Yes or no? Because I think some people, I don't know who towards the end of the table, they did, I think it's my vote for this. Okay, that might be the.
So Mark, I'm just wondering, right? So Michael and Leah were posting some comments on there, like
Mhm.
maybe like take a couple of minutes to see like where the objections lie, based on the proposal to kind of just, do you want to take like 2 minutes to like walk through your proposal and especially, I think the idea is to, like as Mark was saying and like Paul was saying, to consolidate things further, right? So if we can actually propose this as an addition to like, what people have done the same way, instead of like looking at this as an alternative, might be like good before we go further. But Eckhart, you seem very unhappy with that.
Well, I'm just trying to understand what turns on this little hump. And I'm a little concerned about how many frankly humps we've been doing that I don't think get us very far. So,
I'm not proposing to do something.
okay. I guess like what I heard a minute ago, definitely from Aaron, I think from Chris and me, from Paul and Krishna, was there was an attempt by a number of the authors to get together and like try to produce a harmonized thing, right? And that's fantastic. That's exactly the way that things should happen. And what I think I'd like to understand is, do people think that this supersedes Krishna's proposal, or that there's still a piece of Krishna's proposal that he cherry picked out? Is a cherry picked thing only that's part of it? And if the answer is, it is the former, fantastic, and then like we're in one place. And if the answer is the latter, then we're in a different place. And it might be helpful would be perhaps my sense is somewhat more the latter, but I may defer to the other people who actually does this supersede Krishna's proposal, or is it only pieces of it that we still have to think about the rest of it?
What part of Krishna's proposal is like, for example, removing the top level category? If we put that to the side.
Right, because like a bunch of other stuff, like 8 directives.
The stuff, yeah.
So I am not sure that it supersedes it yet, but it's a process, right? I mean, it depends on how things shape up and where the language ends up.
Yeah.
But at some point, we need to have a conversation on reconciliation.
100%. So I guess what I'm wondering is would it be more productive to maybe give the people who the micro design team, the software design team, a little more time to see if they can like pull in a little more proposal and come up with something that would be like, this will just replace all the proposal. Like I think the Krishna's proposal and the current document. And then like we could think about it holistically rather than trying to cherry pick this piece out and stuff it in.
I think that's reasonable.
Yeah, but I think there's one significant piece of Krishna's proposal that isn't in this and isn't envisioned as part of the extension into other content types, and that is the control for indexing and retrieval. So it might behoove the group to talk about whether we want that category to persist.
So that would be an okay way to proceed. I guess like my thesis here is that these things work together. They're not like just individual like things in isolation. And the question we want to be asking ourselves, as I said earlier, is does the combination of the directives we provide allow you to express any reasonable thing you might wish to express? And so that makes me reluctant to just cherry pick one thing and stuff it in and try to understand how it relates to the other things you might stuff in, right? And so that's like why I'm pushing back on this. Even though I actually think this is like a perfectly reasonable directive as it stands individually, right? And so, so that's like why I'm sort of like, I kind of don't want to do like, and I say you don't want to do home, which is fine, but like, I don't want to be like, should we take this thing and put it in as it is? Because I want to understand how it relates to everything else people want to do.
Yeah, no, to be clear, I wasn't looking for a decision or let's take this. I was looking for, is this interesting to you? And I already think, I'm hearing that it is interesting to people.
It is to me.
Yeah.
Mark can go, and I have something to say.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things that are separable in Krishna's draft, and the top level thing that we talked about earlier today remains an open issue, and I wouldn't want to have. I understand Ed's point about holistic, but I think we can keep that somewhat separate to a degree. Not in the final reckoning perhaps, but we need to keep that separate for now. And so that's a component of the proposal. The other component was this search and what is it, indexing and retrieval or what have you. We did talk about that briefly in the small side meeting that we had, and sort of concluded that to a large extent we wanted to rely more on the existing controls and things like robots to text for that sort of thing, and it may not make sense to continue that into a future one. But again, that's a tentative decision that we made, not necessarily a final thing that needs to be made. And once that's done, the other pieces that are in Krishna's proposal are sort of downstream of the sorts of things that we're talking about here, because they get into the finer control aspects of it, which is how long is a snippet are you going to allow, how much video, how high a resolution image thumbnail are you going to allow for things like that. And the conclusion there was that we wanted to defer those a little bit, as long as we saw a path for those to be potentially included in the design at some future date. So to that extent, I think that there is an opportunity here for us to look at this and say whether or not this is a replacement for the current existing search category that are in the working group drafts, and as a replacement for what Krishna has proposed in what I think is the core of the proposal, leaving aside the top level category, and as a replacement for the proposals that we've had from Bradley, who's not been involved in any of this, and what Erin had proposed on the list. And really, the goal of the exercise was to synthesize all of those things into a future direction for that component. And I think if people are happy with the direction this is going, we should do the work.
Right. Well, and what I'm wondering right now is we're getting past close to 2:15. Would an extended break help you develop that a little bit further to get us to a little better discussion later today, or is it say go home, do a proper design team, and talk about it at the next meeting kind of thing?
I'm slightly leaning towards that this needs the homework exercise, and I think it requires that people who are not involved in that discussion today to go back and think about whether this works for them, particularly since we don't have all of the people involved who are actively participating today.
Well, we're certainly not going to make a decision today, but what I'm wondering is, can we get this in a better position for that?
I don't know that there's much we can do to refine it in the sort of high pressure crucible scenario.
I did pretty good on lunch, so
we did all right, but we can continue to try, and we may be able to come back tomorrow. But I don't know if
But I think
setting aside a furlough would help.
I think what we can do to help the design team is to get some of the sort of environment, some more clarity on the environment that we operate in, which comes back to the question, for example, how does this relate to the Cloudflare proposal? Maybe listen to that so we have an understanding of what they're trying to address, can see what the concerns that might not be covered by this, and take that into account. And maybe there's other things that sort of like similarly sort of speak to the sort of environment that we need to design for.
Right. Would it be helpful to do a quick check to see if people are thinking of this as a replacement for search, if it keeps on going in this direction?
I think that's why I was proposing like Leon and Michael are talking on the chat, right? Like there's like some shortcomings of this that they may want to address. I just want to see what the thing is. And Max did send something on the list earlier that he hasn't kind of formalized, but if he does it, maybe he'll also like throw that up at some point if possible. But I do think we do have a draft from Michael and Leah, so maybe as I said, I focus on I think like what Paul said, see what is missing from this proposal and what can be added on top of it, right? Because I think like Edgar was saying, that the idea is to converge based on things that we do.
Yeah. So where are you going to go? Michael, Leah next? Yeah.
I can keep it short.
Can we give a short?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Do you want me to share my screen?
Yes, Aaron, could you stop sharing?
Felix, did you want to say anything?
It's not just
you went through it. Edgar, did you?
No, Becker did his. Yeah.
It's just that it went forward with, we'll see.
Okay. Sweet and short.
No. You could make it bigger, please.
I can make it bigger.
Beta practice on it.
There's no spell checker on this? There's no spell checker?
What do you think? It's like 2025?
Generally, after meeting, the chairs clean up on it.
Okay, so we essentially, and I'll put this in the context of enhancing and complementing the work that from the Cloud First Content Signals policy. So we basically took the terms and provided that as an enhancement to the vocabulary. A few things to note. We've avoided also defining a broader search term, even if personally I'm not against it, but it's clearly a contentious topic, so we actually left that out. And the other principle here defining these was simplicity. And in fact, the definitions here are very short, but hopefully would be somewhat well understood by the audience at large that will be using this. The other assumption here is that when specifying preferences, these three would all be explicitly defined to make it very clear what the behavior is. So if you were implementing preferences, you'd basically specify all three terms and say yes or no to each one independently. We do think that search is worth calling out, especially in the context of traditional search. Yes, the future of search may all be AI generated, but I think broadly speaking, people do understand the concept of, linking back in blue links and just providing input to an index and then returning a ranked search. And I think it's very useful to have that term also as a way to allow search whilst excluding usage for any other defined term. My concerns for the AI output was actually we thought about it the other way around, which is the AI input, which I understand might be slightly out of the charter of the group, but I think for the purpose of, solving some of the problems, it's a good view of a good definition. Basically, I don't want any of my content to be ingested by a model because it may be, used further down the line, and it's unclear at this point how it will be used. And actually, it could even be complementary to AI output. I don't think to necessarily, it's an alternative to AI output at all. And then the third term here, of course, is the training use case, which I think we've broadly agreed on as a group, which is I don't want my content to be ingested for the purpose of training, models or arbitrary usage down the line. That's it. That was the proposal. It's the same one that was published by Cloudflare at Content Signal Store.
So,
Leah, do you want to?
Oh, sorry, just a point of clarification. I think you said we didn't include a top level search category. Did you mean?
No, top level category.
Yeah, okay. Just wanted to-
Then, yeah. And that's cut and paste mistakes that you're referring to, the use as it's a proper subset of the top level category is like.
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
It refers to a top level category. At the last sentence of each of the categories refers to a top level category. By saying it's a proper subset of means that there is an overarching top level category, but I understand that to be a editing mistake.
That was just sort of, if these are the three categories of the vocabulary that we paste into the current draft, then I was just keeping that text because that's how it's been formatted in the current draft, but can be removed if there's no top level.
Yeah. In the Cloudflare, there's no top level category, but this was in the view of fitting it into the existing draft. That's all. So the existing draft, we remove automated processing, we just remove the sentence from this.
Okay, we'll get a pretty big queue for questions or comments. Leonard.
Yeah, I said this in email as well, but I will note it. My biggest concern with this particular proposal, and I realize where it's coming from, is that first and foremost, especially in the definition of AI input, it locks it into search answers. If we remove those two words, I think the definition of AI input would be better because it is not limited only to search. So that would be one thing. And then, of course, I completely understand coming from Cloudflare's position that everything is on the internet and many things are textual. But as I've iterated many times before, we need a set of vocabulary that works off the internet and off the web and addresses modalities other than text. Thanks.
I actually don't disagree with removing search answers from here. So that's a good suggestion.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you. So I think this goes in the, so I think it's a little bit more blunt than the more nuanced thing that the design team proposal came up with. And I'm just thinking, right, if you can kind of take a look at the design team proposal and see what is really missing in your mind and make it edit to that rather than trying to again balance another one, because this doesn't help convergence, right? Because there is certain things, this needs to be improved as well because somebody else's thing is there. So I think in just looking for convergence, make edits, your proposed set of edits on the other one to.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree.
Becker.
So
Just the point of terminology. Just the point of terminology. This wasn't a design team. It was just some people. I had the same reaction. Yeah, I'm not saying it's not good. I'm just saying it doesn't have any priority.
No, I just said like, I don't want to call it Erin because Erin was shy, so.
So, I mean, I think it would be useful to try to like, now that we have those two proposals, to see if we can make sense of like what do you think needs to stick around in this proposal? So I just want to make sure I understand, there are 8 possible values here. What, the one where I say, search no, input yes, training yes, means you could use this for anything but search.
Correct.
Okay. Not sure that's sensible, but I think I understand what it means. Thank you. Okay.
That's empty.
Different entity.
That's definitely, we wouldn't expect lots of people to configure it that way.
Yeah, so with all of these things, there's nonsensical combinations of things that you can say, and it may make sense logically, but it may not make sense for anyone to actually do that, and so we may not see people express that particular set of preferences, and that's fine. So I think the challenge that I have with this proposal, and I understand it was thrown together in a short time today, is not what the words say. I think I can understand what that is, but why they need to say it and why they're different from the ones that we have today. And that's what's missing from this. I would like to ask a lot of questions, and I don't think we have time for it, about why you thought it unnecessary to have a top level category and the rationale behind that. I would like to know why this particular definition of search as opposed to the one that we have, or as opposed to the one that we just discussed, and so on and so forth, all throughout. And having rationale for these things is more useful than having the definitions in many senses. So I'd encourage you to spend the time to do that, not necessarily insist that you provide it on the spot, but if you want to.
Just a quick note on search, we have an addendum at the very end, happy to adopt it. Okay.
Felix.
Yeah, I think the benefit of this approach is that it's really trying to be very easy to understand. But I think the drawback of this is that it doesn't necessarily achieve what it purports to do. So for example, the first sentence, the act of using one or more assets to build a search index and provide search results, is very clear if everybody agrees with it, what a search result is. But you already kind of acknowledge that that is not the case, which is why you added the second sentence, search does not include providing AI-generated search summaries. But then that raises the question, what is an AI-generated search summary? And I would argue that traditional search, which is a link plus a snippet, and the snippet has been chosen by an AI from the whole text, and sometimes even like different parts of the text and taken together, is an AI-generated search summary. So I think if you take this at face value, if you say search the way that it is defined here, you would actually be excluded from search because traditional search is AI-generated search summaries.
Chris. Mike for Chris?
Right. Okay, thank you. So this, I think, sort of much more closely fits about the problem space as I see it. Whereas if I compare this to like the previous proposal that we just discussed, like that's more output focused, like I'm struggling to understand the implications of saying yes or no, or setting various options that are associated with it. In various different contexts. So there's like a traditional search context, there's AI enhanced search, then kind of AI chat interfaces. And so I think I need to sort of think through like what are the implications of setting all those various combinations of options. So like what's on the table here is like much more intuitively easier, I think, to understand and for creators to sort of engage with and relate to. So I think this also I think has the advantage of having preferences that apply at kind of like the input stage of a sort of an existing trained model rather than the output stage. And I think that was perhaps a benefit that Christian's draft also has. And I think to Martin's point about the existing search category, the concern there is that the way that it's, I think, currently drafted is that it allows a lot of the AI summarization to come through still. So I don't think the existing language is quite tight enough yet to sort of
it says very explicitly that summarization is out.
right. Well, I commented on this on the list. Go back to perhaps what I said there, but my feeling of what was written was that it still allowed a lot of the generative AI kind of usage that publishers are still concerned about, and so I think having a more direct, sort of clear statement to that effect, which is what this seems to give us, is helpful.
Okay, Caitlin, just wanted to echo what Felix said and say there's another trace of the same problem in 3.2, the AI input section, because I think the act of consulting a web index to create search results, or even just to figure out which pages are relevant, sort of falls into 3.2 to me. If you concede that the thing doing the accessing of the index is an AI model, and so 3.1 is really a subset then, a particular subset of 3.2 that would be allowed, or an overlapping set which would have to take precedence if search was set to yes and AI input was set to no. So it's not to say, it's just there's some work to do to flesh all of that out.
Okay.
Yeah, this is not a particular position on the whole set of definitions or even on search itself, but I wanted to speak in favor of including the phrase search results or something like that, like Cloudflare has done, because in each of these proposals, and they are drafts, so this is not said with any prejudice, understanding we're all trying to figure this out, that there is an issue in a number of the proposals of overloading terms, so that it's both unclear to the stakeholders on each side of this of what's meant or what's implicated, and the risk of unintended consequences is there as well. But moreover, that there are implications for different business models in lumping these things together. And I just wanted to raise that in the discussion, that including one term to mean many different things has implications as well. Thanks.
Well, yeah, I can look at this proposal from two sides, right? Like, it is simple, it is nice, it gives direction. Unfortunately, it also doesn't represent reality. That is, like, I think the problem that we've tried to address with that category. Like, I also think it doesn't necessarily go into enough nuance about reality. For example, the AI input category is problematic for all the reasons that have been made around sort of users directly submitting things. Like, there's a lot of, like, in trying to make this very simple and like give me like basically three choices. You have sort of, you're essentially reintroducing all the very real issues that we have tried to resolve in some of the other efforts, which led to, frankly speaking, at the moment, relatively unreadable text for most of them. Mm-hmm. But sort of that is the result of reality being complex. We cannot wish a reality where there is like where sort of AI is not involved in the presentation of search results back into reality. We're past that point. And this seems to think we can. And I think that is, to some degree, speaks to the need to also do more of the sort of like to create more understanding of the technical complexities, because to someone who's looking at this sort of not being involved in these discussions, obviously this looks much better than what we're currently producing, right? Like, easy to understand, it intuitively makes a lot of sense, but it doesn't work.
Question.
I actually believe in simplicity, right? This is one of my big things. Parsimony and simplicity are reasons I provide for lots of the changes that I'm raising and issues that I'm raising. But there is some such thing as oversimplification. And unfortunately, this proposal has oversimplified a particularly complex space. Let me give you an example. If you take the AI input category as written, it assumes a certain definition of retrieval augmented generation. In fact, spam labels are retrieval augmented generation aspects as well, because right now we are using LLMs for generating spam labels. Or child pornography protection uses the exact same methodology to input something as RAG to generate those labels. So by saying AI input is no or disallowed, essentially all of the safety protocols that we currently take for granted on the web go away. So there is a balance between simplification and oversimplification. And my fear is that this, just like the pendulum has swung way far on the other side with this proposal. And to me, as it reads right now, just based on the language, it's completely not viable at all as a direction to pursue. Sorry for being that direct, but this is coming from a person who craves simplicity in everything that I do. So,
Edgar. So, I think there's like two questions one could ask about this. One is this the right category breakdown? And second is, are these things that are the text in these things written accurately, right? And so you have some overlap in your categories with other people, and you have some places where you change things. And so I guess to be interested, I think I understand what the AI input is doing, although it seems to me that the AI input, you could actually take the AI input and replace it with like, one could argue you could take the AI input and replace it with the AI output from the previous proposal, and you have something which is structurally quite similar. I'm curious as to why you removed the generative AI training. I don't have a position on that yet, but I'm curious why you removed it. That's the other big change. Did you want to address that?
So, I guess a few, I was writing down some notes. I get David's, Caleb's, and Paul's point, and Krishna's yours about simplicity. I actually think, though, the intended users of this is webmasters at large, and if we overload all these terms, which I align with what Elaine said over the call, this is going to become incredibly confusing. And actually, I would verge towards simplicity here, and that's the feedback we've gotten from a lot of users on Cloud, that they actually like the simplicity and they understand the concept. Yes, you could argue any program at some point will become an AI model. Realistically, though, if you ask the average web developer and you tell them to differentiate an AI use case versus traditional search, I think they'll come more or less to the same answer. And Krishna, to your point, agreed. But these are preferences. We've handled that problem already as part of here, right? You can avoid to use the preferences for the purpose of security, and I think that's a very valid, way to use or ignore the preferences. So I think there's already some tool to make sure we can still be put in spam for the purpose of keeping things safe. Eric, to your point, I think we're just trying to go a little broader, but I personally don't have a strong. It could also be generative. Yeah.
Right. There was the previous draft had a training and the generative training in.
Right. Yeah, we're basically covering both in this one, but open to there was definitely an intent to keep it as simple as possible. Yeah.
I'm going to lock the queue so we can drain it and then go to a break. Sure.
Yeah. So I think like one thing I want to say is, right, like we are always getting new information, right? Like for me, like seeing Erin's like demo was like eye-opening, right? And I do realize this draft was submitted like 1 hour before that thing was shown. So I think like it behooves us to kind of go and take the additional information and try to so when Krishna said, hey, this is not as simple, I think as like a content holder, I think Chris, you saw that dynamic category kind of thing, right? Like would that change your mind in some way, how you want to express that preference, right? Is kind of where I want the working group to go look at and maybe decide for or against it. But the thing is you do realize there's new kind of ways things are getting looked at and AI summaries are being made which are not at least substitutive in my mind, right? And how I would like a richer thing to actually express that preference, even though it may look complicated and gnarly, that some might want to express that preference, right? And I think that would be a good direction to go look at it, and that's why I said do it as a diff on top of the errand proposal rather than as a parallel thing to look at. Because if we are really going in parallel tracks, then there's not going to be any convergence. But if you say hey, this is this one thing I want to do, but your proposal doesn't address that, can we try to address that? And this would be a good way to go forward.
So just one very quick clarification. The submission as a proposal was done last minute. The proposal has been worked on for quite some time and it's been, well thought out.
No. I just said we didn't see this information.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Proposal.
I don't want to give the impression that me and Leah sort of wrote this up in a rush an hour ago, because that's definitely what I want.
No. I said it was an hour before Erin showed the demo.
Sounds good.
Not that it was done in an hour.
I agree.
I think there were some things that this is oversimplified, but I do see I guess changes we could do in the language to be a bit more explicit about the distinction between the two. So 3.1 and 3.2, the first one is basically about search engine services. And the second one is about other generative AI applications that don't include search engines. So if we believe this is in the benefit of the publishers to have this distinction, you have search engines and then you have basically other Gen AI applications. We could do that. And I guess to Krishna's point about the safety applications of AI, which I guess it's always an exception, it might be worth looking into creating an exception for it. So do you opt in into AI input for safety? Do you opt in AI input for training? Well, I don't know how these mechanism systems are being built, but it's always an exception that makes it hard to define the rule. It might be worth considering.
Thankfully, by serendipity, I had my hand raised right to respond to this. I'm a spam operator, and I'm going to opt in to my content being detected as spam. Thank you. It doesn't work quite that way, so it doesn't. Sorry, it's late night for me. I'm being a little cynical. Just also to underscore the point about making it easy for webmasters. Last week, and for many weeks in the last year, I've spent time with over 1,000 small, medium-sized webmasters. And I've collected data in the form of interviews, conversations with a whole bunch of people. The one thing that I will point out is the idea of controlling AI input has never come up in any of those conversations. They always say, I want controls for output or display or one of those scenarios, but I've never heard the scenario where I want control for AI input. Mostly because I don't think people process it that way. Maybe there's always a non-sampling error. So.
Okay, Mark. Where's your mark? No. Keep up. Oh, there you go.
Hi, Mark. Just wanted to, I guess, give a quick reaction to something you said, Michael, a minute ago about sort of the value of simplicity for webmasters, which is very helpful sort of on the preference setting side. I just wanted to chime in as someone who's more on the consumer side. The more ambiguity you have, the harder it is to figure out how to advise clients on okay, is this product AI as sort of undefined in this broad thing? Is this product a generative AI model? Those conversations get really hard just because, particularly in situations where we don't have kind of firm definitions to rely on. And so I think there's kind of a balancing exercise here where you do want this to be something that's simple and parsable for people setting it, but also on the consumer side, if there's too much ambiguity, it either makes it
really hard to know that you're doing the right thing, or it provides incentives for people to say, well, it doesn't explicitly say that this isn't AI, or it doesn't explicitly say we can't do this thing, so we're going to count this as not AI or whatever. So I think there is value in letting people know sort of like what the preference being set is and what that looks like in the real world, while also being respectful of like the more complicated this is, the more you're sort of asking users of the signal to do to actually set. So I just wanted to make sure like that is a perpetually vexing problem for me, and I suspect for some other people on the consumer side as well.
And finally, Paul.
Yeah, I had 2 points, both related on search. The first one is, Michael, I read your response, and I know people understand what traditional search is. Like, I think everybody has an idea about it, but we call it traditional for a reason that it doesn't really exist anymore. It's like the Oktoberfest, right? That people dress up 1 week in a particular outfit, but the real life goes on. They are not wearing this, right? Like we cannot force the search engine providers to sort of like continue sort of like running around the entire year in lederhosen. Say,
I'm taking
so, maybe we can. That's funny, but so that
We
was,
can, but it won't happen.
yeah, we might like to hear things. But the second point relates to searches, but well, I have a little bit also being part of that small drafting group, like a little bit. I wonder, like, I know that saying something about search seems to be like a very sort of prevalent want on the side of web operators and other rights holders. And so I'm a little bit afraid, like making sort of saying something about search, saying like, okay, AI output with 2 parameters that exactly need to match. Maybe we just need to package that and call that search as a subcategory of the category that we were proposing, or something else. We at least need to make it easier addressable than it is in the current proposal that we worked on. That will be, I think, where we can reconcile or find common ground between the 2 things, maybe.
Okay. So let's see, Scott. Here's Scott, but there's 2 people. Do you want to like take a really brief like 30 seconds?
Yeah.
Christopher's first.
Christopher and then Kim. Briefly. Is there a microphone down there? Krishna. Thank you.
Just a couple things regarding traditional search. I mean, there's the way it works in the back end, right? And there's what we see in terms of linking to sources. So I would kind of separate those 2 things. But I just want to say that this is the most constructive kind of conversations we've been having, and things seem to be converging and moving in the right direction. So it seems like there's a path forward here, and we keep combining some of these ideas. So
it's good to hear.
Kim. I was just going to say, I was reminded and you know, maybe on a lighter note to end this with, is that this is sort of like our Schwarzenegger. Everybody's hungry for traditional search, and Schwarzenegger, when he was running for governor of California, people said, "Well, you're just an actor. You know, how can you expect to run the state?" And his response was, "At last, people are calling me an actor. When I was trying to be an actor, they would say, oh, he's just a professional wrestler, bodybuilder, you know." And so I feel like people are now hungering for traditional search when, you know, we've been under all kinds of pressure for traditional search for years, but maybe this is the thing that will show everybody how good they had it, you know, before.
I love that much. All right, let's take some time for a break. People are getting a little punchy. Let's come back at 10 after 3 local time, so in half an hour just from now. And we'll go for an hour and 20 minutes after that.
Yeah, everybody get chamomile tea, no coffee.
Yeah, get some caffeine, get some sugar, get some too.
When are we starting back up?
We're starting back at 10 past, so in about 9 minutes.
Sounds good. Thanks, Mark.
Okay, everyone, let's get started again, please.
So who's taking notes? It's like time.
Yes, I think you have done your duty. Thank you so much, Brian. Your time.
They're brilliant notes.
They are good.
It's your take on the meeting, right?
I'm turning off the camera. Oh no, I did the thing. Okay.
So I go stick my head
Would
out.
you go stick your head out, Warren? Thank you. Quick, let's come to consensus while everyone's talking.
Now we do 1 hour coming.
While we're waiting for people to filter in the room, do we have a volunteer for taking minutes? Anyone, Bueller?
I'll do it.
Thank you, Caleb. You're fantastic.
Have you ever considered using AI for taking notes?
Go ahead.
Just why not? It's a public meeting.
Yeah. He's closing the windows.
Yep.
That's too cooling. Oh. All right, we are getting started. Missing people. Yeah, let's get started. So before the break, we had, I think, a promising discussion. I know. Did anybody have anything from the discussions during the break that they wanted to bring up?
Yeah, I
For the progress?
do, but I want Aaron to be here.
Okay, well, I can't control that. She's coming. She's coming? Okay.
In the meantime, maybe someone could bring up the current working group draft.
The actual text, the search text.
I want figure one.
One moment.
I think it's need a mic.
Mike, there we go.
Yeah, we didn't put lights in charge, but hopefully it'll be okay. Share screen. Yes.
Does he make the mic should have better batteries?
Huh?
Does he make his microphone should have bigger batteries?
Yeah.
They should. So this one, they might be old. So this screen?
Figure one.
Figure one. Up. Yeah, this one?
That might.
Yes.
And then Paul? I see people leaving the room, not coming into the room.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
She's feeling behind the.
okay.
It's in the room.
So this is actually a question for like the unofficial design whatever posse, design posse.
I think that's you.
Hybridization working group.
Cabal.
Yeah. So I think what I'm trying to understand here is the proper relationship between the new preference which you have produced and this diagram, and I think the relationship is that we remove this box that says search and we add a box that says AI output, and that, but then if you wish to be included in the search index, you must actually say AI training yes and AI output. There's also say AI training yes.
No.
Okay, well, I thought, well, I guess that's what I want to understand, right? Because the AI output box only refers to the generation of the content and explicitly right now excludes training. And so it seems to me that, well, no, it does. It says as opposed to the act of training the model in a parenthetical, remember?
Nice.
I think Aaron's about to sit down. Could we send the mic down that way? Okay.
Get a microphone, Aaron. So it specifically says that it doesn't say anything about AI training.
I agree.
And so the question is whether the training is an essential part of building a search index, and your assertion is that it might be.
That's my impression.
I think what I would say is that it is possible to conceive of a search engine that is not an AI-based search engine.
Right.
But our search engine, I think, most contemporary search engines are AI-based, and I am not confident that we are able to understand and rank material if we cannot train our system in how to handle it.
On that specific content is the question.
Yes.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay. This just gets back to what I'm just trying to understand. Like the thing I think a lot of people want to say is, roughly speaking, like, given the status quo ante, I'd like to have like more or less the status quo ante with respect to, with respect to search engines, but maybe I don't want them, maybe I want them to add links, right? I just don't want to say that thing. I want to be included in the index and I want you to add, I put me in the output as long as you like to be, right? And so I just want to understand which set of directives I have to do to have that, as I understand it.
So because this AI output thing was only focusing on output,
yes,
whatever happens in the internals of that system, as long as that's not the boundaries of that system, it doesn't matter what's said on this side. And maybe that's something that we need to be a little crisper about. And this is why I pushed on the question of post-train, because I think by having the post-train or on a trained model clause in that definition, we're essentially saying that we're not, when we say yes to this AI output thing, we're essentially not saying anything about the training of a model. Now, if you take the opposite view, which is to say that there's this big black box, and the only thing that we care about is what goes into that box and what comes out of that box, and it doesn't matter what it does, as long as a trained AI model is not an output of that system, then we don't need to worry so much about the left-hand side of these things. But that's only really possible if we remove the clause untrained.
Yes, this is a good point to be bringing up that I need to think more about, because I think with the hybrid proposal that we had put together, there are there's a category of use that is fairly constrained, and I think it would be difficult to maintain those constraints through an entire training process of a model that is then used in multiple applications, some of which might end up being generative. And so because I do agree, I think that the training component is an important piece of inclusion in a search engine. And so we need to think a little bit more about how those relate to each other. Yes.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
So I that question. But are you really saying that such a search engine can't find something that it hasn't been trained on? Yes.
I think we can hypothesize a scenario where only a single piece of content opts out, and then there are other pieces of content that are similar enough that the model can learn how to handle the opted out piece of content. But I cannot guarantee that if every piece of content is able to opt out.
So I think the challenge here is that we have to look at this from the perspective of the content provider, right? They want to know what they have to say in order to get this effect. And so maybe that can all be done in some sort of like flavor text, where we explain what it means, like how search engines work as just a practical matter to do X, Y, and Z. But like, I don't know, but I'm just saying, like that's the part I'm struggling with, right? Is like that like somehow you have to be able to read this document, understand what we've discussed, what the heck to say, but I think maybe like, do we like agree that like if we were to adopt the AI output, is the position of the people on this sort of ad hoc design team that if we were to adopt this proposal but integrate it with the current draft, we would strike out the search box? Right. No. Yeah, I'm glad we didn't clarity on that one.
So we have Q, Leah, you were on there?
Is
Or was that from before?
Okay. No, I jumped on during the break. So I kind of like wanted to take a step back, and I jumped in before this conversation started, so I apologize for diverting a bit. But the charter states that we're supposed to be standardizing building blocks that allow for the expression of preferences. To put it overly simplistically, there's sort of two players in this situation, right? On the one hand, there's website operators, publishers, content creators who want to protect and control how their content is used by expressing those preferences, and simplicity helps them do this effectively. On the sort of other side of things is bot operators who want to innovate. They want to use the content to train models for inference in response to queries, and simplicity can make that harder, is what they're saying, because, you know, it's not always clear what is and isn't fair game to do that. And I'm assuming best intentions in all cases, you know, from, you know, publishers wanting to be expressing those preferences well and accurately, and bot operators wanting to comply by them. So that's why I want to come back to an earlier point I made, which is that I do think clearer categorization and definitions, even if there's more, achieves both and benefits kind of both sides, right? So you can send less ambiguous messages to crawlers, and it can be both more accurate to what you want to do as a website operator, and clearer for a website operator what they can and can use each piece of content for. And I think yeah, I think Ecker's kind of confusion, my confusion in the chat, Daniel's confusion earlier, goes to the point that, as written, the kind of new proposal lacks a certain amount of clarity. It's not clear on its face how I would end up in a blue links search results only. And Aaron helped me clarify and understand, but what we basically have to do is combine multiple subcategories to create a makeshift third category for being in the blue link search results. And to Mark's point, if clearer messaging can be achieved with simpler categories, even if there's more, then we sort of make both sides of the equation happy. So just kind of, I think everyone in the room and all sort of parties, so to speak, would benefit from a clarification of the categories, instead of trying to, I think, stick with the proposal that has so many of these pieces, and is I think ultimately not very user friendly.
Yeah, thanks. So there's something that's kind of nagging me a little bit on this. So like Edgar's question kind of jogged in my mind. So I'm assuming, right, like, so maybe it's a bad assumption for me to make that once we produce a document out of this working group that's going through standardization process, I assume there's going to be some companion documentation that comes from Google or Microsoft, like, I don't know, Webmaster's Guide or something like that, that says that, hey, if you turn this on, right, like, you're going to be excluded from the results. I assume this is going to exist as a condition. So like people don't have to guess what this means. And maybe it's got some explanation saying like Bing uses AI to do this ranking of these things. And if you don't turn this on, we won't be able to do that, right? Or like whatever the side effects of that are going to be. Am I like dreaming this, or is it something that like is something you would do?
I think we definitely would. The thing we need to avoid is having an explanation that feels inconsistent with people's understanding of the categories. And so the categories need to be like well established enough that everybody is going to work from that common understanding.
Right, because I don't think a vocabulary document is going to explain why this is that way. And I want somebody to explain like why it's that way. Right? Like that.
Can you make that face up?
So the other thing is, that I was managing the robust TXT documentation for 10 years or whatever. And robust TXT is kind of intuitive in its simplest form. And when it gets to corner cases, then it gets proper complicated, and then people go to the documentation. But in its simplest form, like if you just want to block one URL, it's like disallow this, and that's it.
I totally get it, but I'm just saying that like AI training equal to yes, it's not like something that's like obvious to somebody who wants to be found using search. And I think like, if there's like documentation which says like why it's necessary, I think it might make it easier for people to kind of digest that. Is my point.
Mark. Yeah. So I don't want to fixate too much on this problem, but I think I have a solution to it, and it requires a different framing of the problem. So the core insight that we have with Krishna's draft originally and now sort of manifesting in this new hybrid design is that we're focusing on the outputs of the system. And we're talking about governing the outputs of the system, or saying something about what the system can output relative to a given piece of content or what have you. And this question about AI training, I realize can be answered in exactly the same way. if we change this from a process that's applied within the black box that exists in OpenAI's data center somewhere or Meta's data centers or what have you, into the outputs of those systems and concentrate on that instead, then it doesn't matter that AI training is used internally in the search engines, because rather than saying you cannot use this content for AI training, we instead say we cannot use this content to produce a trained AI model, which is just a slight shift in that, such that the output of the system is a set of weights or whatever that's published to the outside world. Then at the system boundary, the output is a trained AI model that is then capable of reproducing its inputs or using the content. Then I think we may have the answer to that question. And so if you think about it that way, you can say things about producing trained AI models as part of your preferences, and that would govern whether or not the system can produce trained AI models. But in the situation where someone's architecture depends crucially on being able to train a model on the content in order to produce search results, that doesn't matter. That's the internals of that system, and that system can operate that way. As long as that trained model doesn't escape that system, and we only talk about then what's shown to the outside of that system. Does that make sense?
I think so. I'm thinking about it. Two
So yeah, think about that a little bit, but I think it's fundamentally the same categories that we have right now, but rather than have the categories we have right now talking about the process that's applied, we're talking about the output of that.
The artifact that
the artifact that the system produces. So if you think about there is a system that is going to take a particular asset as an input, and it's going to produce some number of outputs. If you think about the way in which Meta has produced Llama, that process is a box that contains all sorts of complicated processes, but ultimately there's inputs, which is a bunch of assets, and outputs, which is a trained set of model weights or what have you, and the necessary software to build that.
And just to be clear, you're saying that what's important here is the nature of the output, not whether or not the input is reflected in the output.
That's right. So it's the nature of the output, and to some extent, the other properties that we care about, like substitutive use and what have you. A model that is capable of producing something that can substitute for the original would potentially be something that someone would want to say something about.
So just so I understand, in this situation, OpenAI would not need AI training equals yes, because they do not emit the model. Let me think about that.
So maybe we can think about that one as an example. They sell the use of that model as a thing, and so maybe that does make it an output of the system, right?
I don't know. That's why.
That I think is a very interesting question to ask in this context. Yeah.
Can I? Felix?
Okay. Yeah, I think that's an interesting line of thought. I would just point out it's a very different conception of what AI training is than, for example, the EU AI Act uses. So I think it would probably raise other issues. But I wanted to see if we can narrow down the problem in a different way. So Aaron, you said basically you have your search index, and in order to be able to guarantee that something that's in the index can be found, you train a model on what's in the search index. And if you cannot train it on parts of the index, there's a chance that it might not be found. Is that model that you're training a generative AI model? Or is it just, would it just fall in the AI training category? Because if I can say generative AI training no, and still be found in search, I think that would address 95% of the problem.
I think the problem is how we define generative, and that, going back to the motivating example I shared earlier, we put labels on things that are short and helpful, and I believe we all agree, not substitutive, but they are generated text. And the models that are doing the ranking and sorting and categorization are the models that are doing that text as well. So if we can find a way to define generative at some threshold, that might be possible.
Okay, sounds like it's generative. Thanks.
Yeah, so I think this has been a useful exercise. I think it would be useful to maybe go back to some of the use cases that we sort of generated that document yesterday, then not parse all of them, and see if it was possible to phrase them in some sensible way, given the set of directives people have like provided here, right? I think it would also be helpful to like, I don't know how to do this, and I'm trying not to like write a bunch of work for people, but for the ad hoc design team to like if this is supposed to be a merge of some ideas from Christian's draft and some ideas from the existing draft, to mock up what the existing draft would look like in the face of that merge, so we all can like see it.
That's what we're planning.
Fantastic. That'd be really, really helpful. Tomorrow. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think, and as I said, I think if you were to like, if you were as part of that process, sort of like write down for like the top 3 most important use cases or 5, how you spell them, that'd be really helpful too. What would you say, right? Because I think that obviously we have to back and forth in this. I also am curious of this generative AI category if it continues to exist. Like it seems to me like the nature of you know, the as you said, Martin, this new proposal is very output oriented, right? In the same conceptual frame as Krishna's proposal, though with different verbs. And the left half of this diagram, however, is very input oriented. And is it possible to take the entire thing and reconceptualize the way, in some way, to be output oriented as well, right? Because I do worry that otherwise you end up in a very weird state. The other thing I guess I wanted to say is that I don't think, like, there's sort of like a little bit of suggestion that, like, you know, Google would write on their website, if you want us to index your thing, you should say, you know, if you want to appear in our search index, you should have these settings. I think it'd be really nice if you could read this document, understand for yourself, like what you had to say, and not to read for each search engine, like what settings they wanted you to have. At that point, I might as well just say Google might as well publish the thing they want me to say, and we don't need a standard, right? So, so I think you really, I mean, I think obviously there are edge cases, but I think, I think it should be a case that that you should really infer from the document, like what you have to say.
Okay, Chris?
Yeah, so I think if the result of this is that publishers need to say AI training yes or generative AI training yes, like to be able to appear in search results, then that's not something that creators or publishers are going to want to be able to do, to have to do. You know, so I think there needs to be a way to like just to distinguish on the purpose that the model is being put to, because we know that like these companies will be developing or applying the same model in different contexts for different purposes, and so and I don't think it's like it wouldn't be an acceptable outcome like for content creators to be able to not have the ability to express the preference for sort of different applications of their data, and using appearance in search as like the lever to enable those other use cases. So I think there needs to be some level of sort of granularity of usage categories here.
Well, yeah, I must say I sort of understand the explanation you've given, Aaron, but like it also, I think, challenge, like I don't know if this doesn't undermine some of the fundamental understandings that have structured the conversation that we had so far. I think there was always an understanding that you could separate between training models and then the use of assets by deployed models. If that is not the case in the particular deployment of that you're talking about of pre-trained models in search engine services that you provide. I am sort of wondering, doubt I get a response on record, but like, I mean, you signed specifically that you would not do that when you signed the code of conduct, which says signatories that also provide an online search engine as defined in Article 3, blah, 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 blah. Are encouraged to take appropriate measures to ensure their compliance with the rights reservation in the context of text and data mining activities and the training of general purpose AI models referred to in the first paragraph of the measure does not directly lead to adverse effects of the indexing of the content, domains, and or URLs in which the rights reservation has been expressed. So if that's, I mean, there's a couple of weasel words in there. Directly, I think there's a number of other things, but I think the impression that people observing this process have gotten was that it would be possible to separate these two things. So I think Chris sort of expressed that expression. I'm pretty certain that a number of others in the same industry have come to similar conclusions. So this makes our work much more difficult if this is the case.
I would say that a statement about foundational model development is not a statement about the development of search ranking models in particular. And also that there are limiting words in that text because we made it very clear that we could not guarantee an equal level of findability to content that had opted out of the systems we use to make that content comprehensible and discoverable. So I hear you, but I don't think that's weaseling. I think that's a statement of.
I'm not saying that you are weaseling. I said that you or like limiting words as we can.
I think we should avoid discussing this topic of what companies. I don't think this is the right forum to discuss whether companies are properly complying with any representations they made externally. Please.
Pedro.
Oh no, I'm not wrong. I just read.
So I mean, I had a question maybe that, I mean, I just thought about regarding Martin's remark, I think, on the going more for the outputs. And I think that's a general, I mean, in my opinion, I think that's probably a better approach. But there's one question that I just thought about, and is the existence of open source models. Because the problem is that, well, some of these technologies, the problem is that they have multiple applications. So the technology behind a search engine is very similar to the technology behind a generative AI model. In fact, I mean, one of the problems that I have with the current definition of generative AI training is that given the state of search today, you could possibly take one of those search models, and then like an actor could take one of those models that were trained for search and then use it to generate content. Like that is something that is possible. But then the problem is like, okay, we go to what is the purpose and what is the output. But then the reality of it is that there's also some actors, some public actors, like for instance, in the European Union, there are people today training open source, let's say European models. These things are even funded by the European Union in order for European countries to have let's call it general purpose AI models in their local languages. And then the question is like, well, these things that are open source get extremely restrained all of a sudden in this use case scenario, because I mean, when you release the model weights, you can use it for like the end user can use it for whatever they want. So what would be a solution in that case?
I think the reasoning that I had here was that what I wanted to do was avoid the problem that Chris identified earlier, which is they didn't want, as publishers, to have to say yes to one of the model training scenarios in order to get listed in search. And I think that's the reasoning behind that sort of thing. And so in the case where you have someone producing a model with open weights, there's a number of them out there. Those those would be governed by the AI training categories of use that we have here, maybe slightly altered. And so if someone is producing one of those models, that model would not be produced on content that has preferences indicating that it not be used for that purpose. And so I think that's okay in that context. Where I think it gets interesting is, as Aaron pointed out, in the process of developing a search engine, you might produce a model that can produce both search output and other things. And so for the company that's doing that, maybe they can't release the use or the weights of those models for other people to use because of the possibility that it might violate the model training preferences that we use there. And so they have to separate those models out and use all the techniques that they've learned on developing one to develop a different one, but use different assets in the production of it. And so in the case where someone has released a model with open weights and one set of people seeks to then use that model to develop a search engine, though they might have gotten permission from certain assets to integrate that into that as a search engine, that would not be available because they have to abide by the AI training categories of use in producing the model in the first place. And the person using that model downstream of that would be bound by whatever usage they intend to put it to, whether that be search or something else.
I mean, the scenario that I think it gets a little bit complicated there is that as long, I mean, as I understand it right now, if you are a private company that is not releasing the weights, you can train, let's say, a transformer, whatever, for search, and that you're using for indexing, and that's okay because the right holder or the webmaster indicated that it's okay for search. However, if an open source initiative wants to release a model that can potentially be used for search, but that can also be used for generative AI training, well, they're governed by the other AI training category. So they cannot release the model, and therefore open source or smaller players that are not these private companies cannot use this model for search. Is that correct?
No, that's not true at all. But it does change the dynamics of the situation in ways that I think we probably should take offline and talk in text rather than talk on the microphone, because I think we need pictures and words for this sort of thing. It's a little complicated. I'm going to let Marina speak now instead.
She needs you.
Okay, that was the same line now. Okay, so it's echoing.
So I think there is, maybe we were talking the thing, Martin, that you were saying we need to have pictures for, right? But as I understand the state of play, say I am someone like Common Crawl that does a big crawl, right? The assumption is that I propagate the labels, but don't enforce them. And so, if one imagines there was a way to say, so in these categories, for instance, you can train a model, you can train an AI model, but you can't use it for generative, whatever the heck that means, right? Then there'd be some notion that I could train the model, it has a bunch of weights in it, I ship it out, and anybody who takes it is constrained by whatever the heck it means to be an AI model, is not a generative model. And they can't use it, right? Now, again, I'm not sure this distinction makes any sense because these models are all, as far as I can tell, all the same thing. But if you imagine, if you imagine that there's some way to say, well, you can train the model, but the model can't be used for certain applications, then the way that open weight models would be handled is that would be an obligation on the people downstream of the model, and not the people that made the model. And you could, that's my understanding how that has to be interpreted.
Yeah, actually, that dovetails pretty nicely with something I was going to say, which is, I think some of these problems are solved if we focus on the application of the model and not the capabilities of the model. And so, being able to generate outputs does not put a model in the generative AI training category, assuming we have one, but actually doing the generation of outputs does.
But if you're open weights, how does that change that situation? That is, I think, the core of the questions that we had here. And so if you're giving it away, there's an unbounded set of things that could potentially happen to that model after you've given away the weights.
Yes.
So I think you have to be bound by all the constraints that potentially exist unless we are more precise about our definition of what it means to train a model.
Or third parties have to follow that in the way they apply your model. But that does get complicated if they do not know what content was used in the generation.
Exactly. They're not going to know what was fed into the model.
Yeah.
Right?
Pedro.
It just about that last comment. I think there's an issue there, especially with the case of the open weight model, talking about capabilities. No, sorry, not about capabilities. Talking about use instead of capabilities. Is that so? Let's say that I don't know, somebody used Common Crawl to train an AI model that then they open source, and they actually say in which documents of Common Crawl they use. And that's amazing because Common Crawl actually stores and archives all the robots.txt, so we have all that preferences there. Okay. The problem that you will encounter is that as soon as that model is trained on one document that constrains it more than the others, so let's say once like million documents say it is good for generative AI, but one document says you can only use this for search, then by definition that model can only be used for search just because because it was trained on that one document. I mean, at least that would be my understanding with the current phrasing.
Well, yeah, there's a reason why these definitions were like about training are as they are in that draft. That draft was the subject of very long discussions. Like all of this discussion is now happening for the third or fourth time. The point is, you need to train a model. There's open weight releases. You cannot determine the characteristic of that is that you give people the model and they can use it for whatever they want in compliance with the license. Therefore, we have defined the AI training category and the generative AI training in the way they are. The generative AI training says sort of like has generative AI as a purpose, as capacity-based, largely capacity-based. There's a tiny little purpose-based thing in it because it is impossible for anybody training a model if that is released as an open weight model to determine what it's used for. Therefore, like you need to make the decision at training time and you need to filter out stuff where people say like this, if your model has the capacity to, like has generative capacity, you cannot use at the training point assets for which the entity sort of making a statement about this, a valid statement about that asset says, don't use this for training generative AI models. That's the entire point of this. The entire point of this is not like retroactively what all could happen to say like, and now how can we make as much as things possible? The entire point of this thing is to give the declaring parties the ability to say certain things that they want to happen or not to happen with their things. One of them happens to be training AI models. Another one happens to be training generative AI models. And if that is expressed, that needs to be followed up. And then you can't use it for training these things. If we sort of like, maybe we need more categories in this space, but like we can't like just sort of like try to sort of engineer or yeah, the word I used previously is sort of, let's not use it again, engineer out of this thing. Sometimes something sort of like, sometimes there's rights holder who says, I don't want this to happen. And then depending on the legal context you're in, you may have to respect that, or you may want to respect that. And that's sort of what we're trying to enable here. And I don't see where this discussion takes us any closer to achieving that.
Suresh? Yeah, thanks. So like following up on what Pedro was saying, right? So Common Crawl crawls like a whole bunch of things and they like pass along the robust.txt files, right? And what stops somebody from making a smaller data set, right? Which had the generative AI stuff allowed, right? Like, because I think that could solve the issue of like some bad data getting into the model, right? Like, so I'm not seeing why that would be an issue. I don't know, Tom, like, if this is something that people do already, take a set and make a smaller subset out of it, right? Like, I don't see why that would not be possible if somebody expresses a preference not to use a generative AI, for example.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just that we're toward the end of a long day of active brain work, but I'm not really understanding why the open model case is different than any other case. When you start training a model, you select the set of content, and that conditions what you can use the model for. So if you have included content that is opted out of generative AI training, then like downstream of that model should not be generating things. And that remains true whether the downstream uses of that model are within a single entity or, by third parties who have licensed the model from some open provider who provides with it a statement that says these are the constraints on the use of the model.
At which point it isn't an open model anymore, because like an open source license will not sort of put constraints on the use of the model. There's there's lots of discussions about this here, but like there is a class of licenses, like the open source licenses, which have as a characteristic that they do not discriminate against users. Now, how these can useful be applied or not applied to models is sort of like a lot of discussion, but there is a practice of people releasing model weights under these licenses. And in that case, like the entity who did the training cannot guarantee that the downstream users comply with the sort of selection criteria that they made when using the assets.
But there are two options here. One option is that an entity training a model that they want to release under one of those broad open licenses restricts what they train on, because, right, they can do that. And the other option is that the open source, like open licensing, evolves to allow for these kind of restrictions to be passed through.
So I'm not even sure that statement about the licensing is correct. So, if you go back to patent, for instance, I can build something that's patented, and I convey the right to the copyright. I do not convey the right to the patent. That's a perfectly reasonable thing that happens all the time in open source software. And we're not lawyers. Some of us are. Some of us are, but we're not a legal entity. So I think trying to I don't think this is probably the right level of analysis for what we're trying to say here. And especially legal concepts will differ in various locations. What I get the cue to say though was my understanding. I think Aaron and Pedro and the other people who are actually LLM experts can correct me here. Was that as a practical matter, all these models are generative, and that that is a practical matter. Most of the modern model architectures have some generative capacity, and you either use them generatively or don't use them generatively. So is that roughly accurate? Anybody want to answer this question? Because I thought I was already. I'm just echoing back what I thought people said. I don't know any better. I saw people nodding. Does anybody want to actually say any words? Okay. I guess the question I'm trying to get at is it even meaningful to distinguish if the question is when you train the model, is it a generative model or non-generative model? Is it even meaningful in a modern context to make that distinction?
I can answer the question, but I'm not on the queue.
Go ahead.
I mean, the answer is it's difficult, but yes, it's almost always generative. So for instance, because this is the problem that I have with, for instance, the differentiation between AI training or general purpose AI training and generative AI training is that if you take something, I don't know, let's say an LSTM is a model from 93, I think, if I'm not mistaken. That's a generative model. I mean, it's not going to give you like these amazing dialogues because it's actually very expensive to make it bigger, like a transformer. But it's totally generative. In fact, is what we use for years and years in translation. So the distinction between AI training and generative AI training is extremely complicated from a technical point of view, because if you're thinking about, I don't know, I don't want to say bad actors because I think it's out of the scope, but like whatever actor in general that takes a general purpose AI, they can potentially use it to generate text as well, or images, or whatever you want.
Okay, Ken.
I'm gonna pass.
You're gonna pass? Pedro, was that all you wanted to say?
Yeah, maybe I think that was a question from Suresh, if I'm not mistaken, about like somebody using a subset, let's say, I mean, of common crawl, or for let's say in search. So the problem that I see right now is that, yes, you can, of course, take a subset of because we pass all the preferences to the end users, that you can potentially take only the search part of it. The problem that I see is that this is creating an imbalance. Why? Because a private company that is never publishing the weights of the model and is never making anything open source, that is just developing a project, can comply with this. That means that company can train with both everything that is marked as AI training, generative AI training, and even search for a search index. But an open source actor cannot do this. Why? Because as soon as you publish the model that was trained with anything in the search category, anybody can use it to generate text. So the distinction is that these search index models, if like with the current, I mean, at least from a technical perspective, I think, can never be open source with the current definitions and the current things that we have right now.
I think bad actors will be bad actors, right? Like, so I think we cannot optimize for bad actors. I think we should optimize for good actors, I think.
And enforcement is as go through the charter, I think, but we still do need to understand the implications or choices. So that we locked the queue and drained it. My understanding is a group of folks is going to go off and refine that text a little bit more. Is that still going to happen? Gary, how long can we use this room today?
We have it booked until 5.
Until 5? So if those folks want to use that room till 5, I sense that people are getting a bit tired.
I do have one.
I know, we'll get there. So if that group wants to continue that, and I think folks are welcome to participate in that. And then tomorrow morning, we'll come back and see if they made any further progress. For me, the goal is if we can come out of this meeting with a crisp proposal for a change or a set of changes to the draft that is relatively self-contained, and it's contextualized so people understand that it's not trying to address all of the issues that we have, because there are certainly more things to discuss, but making some concrete progress that reflects a broad input, not just one viewpoint. That would be really a good outcome for this meeting. And so if we can discuss that a bit more and make sure that it's on the right footing tomorrow morning, and then take that out to the list afterwards, I think that would be a good way to spend our time. Does that make sense? Are people just now too tired in this part of the afternoon where you don't nod to everything I say? Okay. Excellent. Have you just run lunch? So we had one more, I think we'll probably end a bit early today, but we had one more brief thing that we wanted to do. Max Gendler from Newscope wanted to present an idea that he had. So we want to give him just about 5 minutes to present that, and then gather any feedback from the room after that, if there is any. So Max, are you still with us?
Yes. Hi, good morning.
Good morning. Let me unshare here, and you can request sharing. One moment.
Yeah, you have it, Max.
Good. Take it away.
Okay, I think I've got this going right. Can everyone see that?
Make it bigger.
Good?
Yeah. Feel like you're playing directly to it.
I think that's as big as it can go and fitting
That's
everything.
getting there.
Okay. First of all, thanks to the chairs for their flexibility on this. I won't be able to attend tomorrow when we're supposed to talk about the attachments draft. So thanks for letting me put my ideas out there for people to react to. As some of you may have seen on the list, Mark, would you mind muting the room? Sorry, I can just hear.
Oh, sorry. Yes, I will.
Thanks. So as some of you may have seen on the list last week when there was still the last call going on, I put out a note with a couple of comments, and one of them was around the terms of service. And basically, I wanted to put this out in front of the group. I don't think we'll do an in-depth discussion today. As Mark said, I think everyone's getting a bit tired. But just as a preview for the attachments conversation, I think it would be useful to have a pointer to terms of service, as publishers have for a long time now obviously had either terms of service or terms and conditions, depending on their personal verbiage. And I think that as a pointer to a publisher's preferences, it can be quite useful, especially as I think we've had some trouble figuring out whether we want to go broader, whether we want to go more narrow with the vocabulary. I think this is sort of agnostic to that conversation, though I'd be happy to hear counter arguments to whether or not it's agnostic, and is meant to be additive to the attachments draft. I don't mean this as a replacement to the attachments draft, but as an additive bit. So at the bottom, you can see a little bit what it might look like, and I'm modeling it very basically off of how de facto robots.txt has sitemaps. I recognize it's not a part of the IETF standard, but it is in quite broad usage. And so you would have, similar to how sitemaps are outlined with a URL, you could also have a terms of service pointed to with a URL. Again, I'm hopefully going to put an ID together around this, but obviously if people have thoughts and feedback earlier, would love to incorporate that before the first draft of the ID if there's thoughts. But yeah, just a quick preview of the idea, and happy to take any questions if people have them, or if you'd rather I'll go out to the bar and relax now, I totally understand that also. Thank you.
Well, hopefully that'll happen anyway. Any initial comments, questions, feedback? You're welcome. Tom.
Tom Ford, Common Crawl. Terms of service texts are not machine readable. So this, it's been said hundreds of times before, this would just not work at scale. It's impractical and it just wouldn't work. I mean, you can put a pointer to your terms of service if you like, but it would just be about as much use as putting a link to your, a picture of your cat or something. It would be meaningless. Some people like pictures of cats, of course. I do, for sure, but
Mark?
This is not about this idea, but it may be a way to submarine it in. We have link relations, and there's a link relation called terms of service. But there are also other link relations that might be useful. If you can find a use for one of the other link relations in this context, outside of this working group, adding that to, that's already present in HTTP, that's the attachment that you care about. But adding some sort of generic linking capability in robots text would be a very interesting possibility. Considering that you're delivering robots.txt over HTTP, you already have that capability, and you can say when you retrieve the robots.txt, you can provide a link relation in the header that points to the terms of service. So the capability already sort of exists. The question is, to what extent is it bound to the resources that are identified within robots.txt as opposed to the document itself?
So I'll interject briefly. The web linking RFC has the concept of an attachment mechanism, which is maybe language we're familiar with here, and So you have to find that for robots of text. And as you say, there's only one for HTTP headers. But it also has the concept of an application, which is the scope of what are the link relations that are meaningful in this context. So that would have to be defined. I think that's probably the missing piece beyond the robot subtext. Mark.
Hi, Mark. I just want to ask a quick question because I think it's not clear to me, sort of as you're conceptualizing this field, is this going to take a single value or multiple values? Because something I think I come across a lot is that sites sometimes split up their terms of service among multiple pages and multiple sort of contractual objects. I will note, just for sakes of the exercise, I pulled up the News Corps terms of use, which links to a privacy policy on a separate URL. Usually like privacy, content, copyright, sometimes those get broken off separately. Sometimes there's like an EU flavor because the EU terms are different than the US terms. And so just sort of like thinking through this conceptually, I guess aside from just seeing readability, like I'm cognizant that there can often be multiple legal objects governing a relationship between a site and its many users wherever they may live in the world. And so just want to make sure that kind of as you're thinking about this as a draft, like you're thinking about that as well. Because that's sort of my first reaction is like, okay, is there going to be one set of terms, or are there different terms for different regions? Are there different terms broken out for different subject areas? Like that's something I frequently have to think through, and just wanted to point that out as a concern or potential area of concern.
Yeah, happy to answer that one briefly, if I can jump queue. Yes, I do think of it as something that can have multiple inputs. I probably should have made that clearer here. Sitemap often takes multiple inputs. You just have sitemap and then just line after line of sitemaps. You could probably see that on one of our sites as well. My general thinking, and not a lawyer, though I try to talk to some before I wade into conversations like this, is that you would probably place the terms of use or service or terms and conditions that is applicable to crawlers, because there are, for some of our properties, there are B2B facing terms and conditions. There are B2C. There's newspaper versus RSS feed. Like all of these things have different flavors. So I'd imagine there would be something that was pointed appropriately, and possibly you could have more than one. But I'd imagine that there would be some consolidation of this is the one that is for this specific use case. Again, I think it should be flexible enough to allow multiple if publishers would want to put multiple. But I'd imagine that the eventual practice would be one, because there's obviously quite a few differences between sitemaps in terms of service, in terms of how they're lined up. But yeah, that's sort of my brief thought on that way.
Arena.
Yeah, I think a recurring problem for those who are trying to sort of like figure out what sort of like references someone has over their content is that the robots of text sometimes like mismatches the terms of service. And I guess in this context, if you have also like robots of text and then you also have internal service, you probably need to define which might need to have prevalence, like which one should I rely on more than the other in case they conflict. Is this something that could be sort of like, I guess, added or have like a priority to one to another?
Yeah, I'm sure we could hammer that out in the ID / the attachment draft. I mean, the attachment draft has some verbiage around what if there are conflicts, how do you handle those? I'm sure we can get into those details. I think there is going to be, frankly, a conversation around which parts of this are standardizable, which terms of service I don't think are, right? Like publishers explicitly want flexibility in terms of service for a number of reasons, as do just about any commercial interests. So there is going to be a question of what the language surrounding that information being there is. But I think having a pointer is sort of just the starting place for the conversation. I can't say that I've come to a concrete idea of how how conflicts might be handled.
James, I think it's more a foundational question that goes to one of the points made earlier around machine readability, in the sense that if terms of service aren't machine readable, then I just would like to understand what the intended purpose is of the pointer. And what are you intending this to? Who are you pointing this to? And what are they to do with it? Is it intended to turn terms of service into something machine readable? Or is it intended to, because the terms of service already exist. There are already applies, it's just putting another, so I just want to try and understand, like, what is it doing by adding the pointer? And if that rationale could be kind of enunciated in the draft, I think that would be useful to understand, like, what the purpose is.
Sure. Briefly, I would say that I think a number of fine folks in this room have built some lovely machines that do very good reading, and I've seen some examples of AI prompts where they can read a terms of service quite well. You know, they're not at 100%, but I think the idea is that they'll keep improving. Generally, I think that it is a useful qualifier for publishers to say, hey, not everything that we would like to refer our preferences on is covered in this language, which I think we're seeing quite naturally from the way the conversations have happened, and different publishers have different preferences, and that's kind of normal in terms, or preferences on what that vocabulary looks like, and that's kind of normal. And so at least it's able to say, hey, here's what's in the attachments draft or in the updated robots TXT. But you know, there's some other stuff that goes on as well, and here's a reference. Again, I think there are both legal questions and standards questions here, but from a standards perspective, I don't think that, like, I'm not looking for terms of services to be standardized. I don't think that that can be, but I think just having that information available and more clearly available sorry, I think the man who raised this point earlier was Mark. I'm sorry if I'm misremembering your name, but the idea that there are multiple terms of service and sometimes people don't even know which one to go to. I think it's useful to go, well, if you don't know which one to go to, hey, here you go. Here's the one that we think you should go to. And I think that at the least is a useful signal for the ecosystem. Yeah.
James. Just to follow up on that, and I think you kind of touched on it in that response, which is, I think terms of service are a legal mechanism designed for people, and robots.txt is a technical mechanism designed for bots. And I'm not sure necessarily that they both intersect.
Yeah, look, I mean, the natural language component of terms of service is for people, but bots don't exist in a vacuum. People are behind them. I don't see why there can't be information for the people if they would like to look at it.
Getting towards the end of the queue, Gary?
So this idea came up in the IAB workshop as well last September. And I think there was a resounding no in the room back then, because it doesn't matter how you twist it. AI, the way AI works at the moment, or how it's created at the moment, it's not going to lose its hallucinations. If you give something to Gemini to summarize, and then you give it to DeepSeek, and then you give it to OpenAI models, they are very likely going to spit out very different things. And what you said, that it's a legal document, how are we supposed to deal with the potential misinformation that's coming from those models? So I think extending robots.txt with something like this, easy, but then processing and then interpreting the terms of service with a machine, at least at the moment, is not feasible.
So, just to contextualize here, we're just giving Max some initial high-level feedback. Let's not get too deep into the discussion because, you know, we don't want to spend too much more great time yet. But hopefully we're giving some helpful initial feedback. Ronnie.
Wait, sorry, may I briefly respond to Gary?
Briefly, yeah.
Yeah. Gary, I think it's fair to point out the conversation from last year's workshop. I'd refer to it as a lukewarm no, and I think I was part of the lukewarm no at the time. I've come around to a different perspective primarily because of how the conversation in the group has gone over the last year. You know, I was frankly more optimistic about our ability to standardize the language, and seeing, I think, the struggle is what has encouraged me to take a look in this direction more actively. I think in terms of, I wouldn't say at this point that I'm making any claims about machine readability of the terms of service. Again, I like what AI is doing, but I'm not insisting that that is going to be what the standard is about, because again, I don't think that terms of service are standardizable. I think of this as a useful pointer, not as a holder within the standard, if that makes sense.
Right.
Yeah, just echoing some of the things that were mentioned here. Even though it might be useful as a pointer, I don't see how it relates to specifically what we've been doing here and progress that we made specifically regarding AI preferences. And it might just make it more complicated just to dive in to understand what can be or shouldn't be part of the terms of use. So the attachment itself is a whole different discussion, and adding this, other than pointing this out, as you mentioned, don't see the added value at this point.
So two people left. The queue is locked. Just 30 seconds each, and then I think we'll wrap for the day. Paul.
I think it's extremely useful, mainly because what Max just said, it reminds us like what the alternative is if we don't get our act together on what we've discussed earlier today. Like, I mean, this is like if we are essentially going in a direction which ignores largely the concerns that are consistently expressed by the people for whom we're trying to craft preferences, then these people will not want to express preferences to that what they're building here. They will want to express them through terms of services. They may want to change the law to make things different. And I think that was the original purpose of the working group. And I very much appreciate what Mark said. Like, that conversation really has sort of shifted remarkably in a direction of one group of stakeholders over the last year. And yeah, this is the alternative.
Yeah. Microphone?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, if we're going to have both, then it's not the alternative. I mean, that's not what an alternative is, right? So I guess I'm confused as to the point of this, and I think I do think it muddies the waters a little bit. Like, well, you'll have to flesh out what this would actually be for, other than to create an open text form that is added into our specification by proxy, or a way to override or add additional constraints that we thought were too confusing or not good for the ecosystem to be allowed to be expressed in this way. So I think there's a value to keeping them separate, provided we fulfill our destiny, you know. And if we don't, then we'll be left with the toss anyway. So I'm not sure what this accomplishes. But I hate to be such a downer as the last commenter, so if you aren't, please rescue us.
So you're going to go to dinner soon, perhaps get a drink. So maybe that's not fair.
Or stand at the wall.
Right. So Max, you know, you're of course welcome to work on a draft here. I guess from a chair perspective, just speaking to myself, having talked to Trish and Steve, because this is just come up on the doorstep. I have questions about how this fits into our charter. I mean, that the attachment mechanism is supposed to be about attaching the preferences that find the vocabulary, and this is kind of short-circuiting that. And I guess if you squint really hard, you could see this as a preference, but we'd have to talk that through, and of course we need some sort of agreement to adopt. So it's doesn't from this initial discussion, it doesn't look like there's an easy road to walk down here. I see Suresh for your benefit shaking this. or-
Yeah, so I also don't see how it fits in the charter without addressing at least like one point that Ekar mentioned. About like the ambiguity of potentially reading this thing. And the other part that came to my head is like, how does it combine with the other preferences that are expressed, right? Like that we defined. So I think like those two is something you need to look at, Max, right? And then come back with a draft. Thank you.
Yeah, I think those are reasonable points and ones that I had considered. I just wanted to get the brief out there so that I could hear it sort of from the wider group. Happy to take it away.
Yeah, and you may get a different response from the other ones as well. So, but I think you hopefully got a flavor for the initial response in the room, and if you want to put more, I think we can keep that thread along. Okay, so I think we're done for today. It's a little bit early. If the folks want to continue on and work on that proposal, best of luck. And we'll start again tomorrow morning at 9:15. I think we'll maybe really look for any progress that's made during that intervening time. And we'll finish up tomorrow. I don't know how much we'll talk about attachment. I think that seems a little premature right now. Continue that discussion and talk about next steps, talk about how we can keep this going. Talk about future meetings, things like that. So have a good meal, have a good sleep, and we'll see you again in the morning.
Thanks all, and thanks again for our minute takers for the nice notes.
Indeed, thank you very much.
That's not.
Oh, sorry. And then no one else did.
You're the only person who's like, not really, yeah.
Yeah. No, it's fine. They're not here. It's so hard.
At least it wasn't the first day when I didn't know.